Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchlis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Balak, Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Shivasa B'Tammuz Nidche. So tomorrow, technically, we start the 3 weeks. And there's a big significance and idea that it's a Shivasa B'Tammuz Nidche, and we'll speak about it. And obviously, this week was Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, a big yontif for Gans Klal Yisrael, for all of the entire Jewish nation. We spoke about it a bit last week. So we have to understand the connection between all these things, and it's Parshas Balak. What are the lessons? Before we start, as usual, we'll start with a pasuk, a prayer from Tehillim. We're going to say the same pasuk that we started last week, because the beginning of today's lesson is continuing on a theme that we started last week. And that is pasuk Dalet from Kapitel Kuf Lamed Vav. Liyoisei niflois gedolos levadei keli elam chazdei, which means to he who alone performs great wonders, for his kindness is forever. Last week we mentioned that there's a level of miracles that only he knows about. So many things happen to a person daily which you might not know about, which are miracles. Last week, we spoke about the miracle that happened, Oz Yoshi Yisrael, that there were enemies that were hiding in caves to ambush the Jews. And Hashem made a miracle that one mountain moved into another mountain and crushed all those enemies that were hidden in caves. And the only way we found out about it, because the Eibusha decided that the bones and the blood that were pulverized should come up through the Be'er. So that's what we spoke about last week. So Hashem did a miracle, and he did a miracle that we should find out about it. We should find out about it, not because we witnessed it happening, because the Eibusha wanted us to know about it. From there we took a lesson that just like there's cases where the Eibusha lets you know, there could be miracles that he doesn't let you know, and that's what the meaning of the pasuk is. That in a certain sense, we say the miracles that he alone knows about are called the Neflois Gedolos. They might even be connected to the highest level, higher and greater than revealed miracles. Whatever the explanation shouldn't be. So interestingly enough, in this week's Parsha, we have events which there's a chidush, there's a novelty of it, a uniqueness, which I thought about for many, many years. And today, I found out that it's a Gemara. Obviously, I learned this Gemara before in my life. It's Gemara in Bava Basra, Daf Yud Daled, Omid Beis. But I had forgotten this Gemara. What is the Chidush? What do we see from this week's Parsha? We have 3/4 of the Parsha until the end, where it speaks about how the Benois, Midian, caused the Jews to sin. A whole story about two nasty characters, two great anti-Semites, Bilam and Balak, who are plotting and scheming to bring great harm to the Jewish nation. And then Hashem, wonders and wonders, miracles and miracles, causes that the very words, their plot and schemes, Utzu Eitzav V'Sufar, not only weren't they curses, but they turned out to be the greatest blessings and statements that were ever said about the Jewish nation. So much so that many of these verses allude to the greatest time that will come in Mitzvah Hashem in the future, Messianic times, the Mashiach. In this parsha, more than anywhere else, in Chamisha Chumshi Torah, do we have psukim that are related to Mashiach. So that's awesome. Besides the open revealed miracles about the donkey of Bilam, etc. So all this is happening without the knowledge of the Jews. And herein lies a chidush, a novelty that is not anywhere else in the entire Torah. From the time of the Exodus, from Chumash Shmos and onward, every single thing that the Torah records, events, happenings, happened in a way that was with the Jewish people, that they themselves witnessed it. Over here, we have the major portion of the entire Parshas Balak that no one saw. So first the lesson, miracles that happen that could be happening that you don't even know about, that are miracles of the highest order, levels of Mashiach sort of things. That in the flies, there were miracles that were similar to what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. But more than that, so this was something that I always wondered about. But guess what? The Gemara says the following expression: Moshe Kosav Sifrei Upashas Bilam. The Gemara points this out. That what? Moshe Kosav Sifrei Upashas Bilam. That even though he wasn't witness to the events of Parshas Bilam, he also wrote that. From here the Gemara says that you see that Moshe is writing what the Eibusha tells him to write. Because otherwise, how could he know what happened? He wasn't there. So here we see a raya that when Moshe wrote the Torah, it's the Eibusha who told him these things. So not only does Torah make a big deal about this idea that all the events that is transpiring in our parsha this week is something that we didn't witness, we didn't know about. Even more than that, the Torah, the Gemara mentions this and points it out to say Moshe Kosav Sifrei or Parshas Bilam. Parshas Bilam is Parshas Balak, according to most commentators. So we see that this is a very important point. Not just an interesting curiosity, but a curiosity that from here we say that we have to say that the Torah was given to Moshe from Hashem. So in other words, you know, when you look at something, we underline it, we say, do I have your attention? Pay attention. So therefore the events that transpired in this week's parasha, because there's a uniqueness that is not in other parts of the Torah, that means you have to pay special attention. And therefore the lesson I'm taking about it is the idea of the miracles, that even though we don't know about it, etc., like we said before. Now, this idea, now's not the time to elaborate how always in the most dodgy sort of circumstances, things that start even bad, nasty, evil, so to speak, and from then comes the greatest light. So this is something we've spoken about many times. Yisrein ha'or. How do we get the greater light? Min ha'choshech, when it comes from the darkness. That's the system, the way they wish to set it up. And that is a theme which is repeated again and again and again in Chassidus and shown to us again and again. But we have to speak about it again today because this is a very strong truth and this is very important for a person who's living through situations in life where there's darkness, it seems to be darkness, and it's very tough to be able to deal with it. So you have to know the truth. And this brings us, number one, like we saw this week's Parsha, that the greatest anti-Semites brought the greatest blessings. And it was transformed. Okay, but now let's go to the 3 weeks, and we're going to talk about this idea that Shiva Asar Tammuz is Shabbos. But first, what I'm going to say now is based on a Sikha of Chelik Yud Ches of Likutei Sichos, the Sikha of Yud Tammuz. It's a very well-known Sikha. It's a very important Sikha. See there at length. I'm just going to give a tamtzis, a small bit of what it says there. The Rebbe talks about how every single month has a central theme. And we see that one, and how do we know about what the central theme is? The major day of the month usually sheds light on what the central theme is. Like, for example, by Purim, Chodesh Adar, we say, HaChodesh Asher Nepach Lehem. So we're saying we celebrate Purim on one day, let's say, but then the entire month is considered the month which brought good fortune. Mishenichnas Adar Marben B'Simcha. The same thing is concerning, let's say, Sivan. The Gemara says the Torah was given b'yachet lisa'ah, the third month from Nisan. So in other words, we're attributing the date of Matan Torah to the whole month. Now the same thing's over here. When we look at Tammuz, we have to question what is the central theme of the month. Now you might think that the main theme is Shiva Asar Tammuz. That's the day that existed for thousands of years, and it occupies many days of the month, because from Shiva Asar Tammuz starts the 3 weeks, the Yemei Bein HaMitzarim, and there's a verse in Tanakh which says Tzoim Haravi connected to the 4th month from Nisan. But comes along the Rebbe and says that this is the beauty and the profundity of Yud Beis Tammuz, Yud Gimel Tammuz, Chag HaGeula, The Eibishter provided us with this Chag HaGeula, a holiday of redemption, to show us what the true pnimius of exile is. That the true pnimius of exile is really Geula. And this is the paradox. And he associates this paradox with the name of Tammuz itself. We see the same sort of paradox. On the one hand, we say that Tammuz is a name of an Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says that Hanoshim Yeshveis Mevakris es Tammuz. So women would cry, because that was the activity, part of the way of serving this idol with this image. The idol was called Tammuz, and it had eyes made out of lead, and from inside it was heated up, hot like a furnace, and the lead would melt, and it looked like the idol was crying, and women would cry in front of this idol. So Tammuz is the name of an idol. On the other hand, Chassidus comes along and reveals that what's the real meaning of Tammuz? Tammuz, if we would strip it down, filter it, distill it to its essential definition, means heat. The heat is on. But which heat? The heat of Kishemesh Umogin Avaya Velikim. The sun is compared to Shem Avaya, the higher name of Hashem. The sheath around the sun is corresponding to Shem Elikim, a lower level. The sun itself, real intense, extreme heat, is Shem Havaya. So what does Tammuz represent? A time when the intensity, the inner sun, shines. I.e., what's Tammuz? A greater level of Gilui Elikus, revealed godliness. So we have a paradox. So the question is, what is Tammuz? Is Tammuz the name of Avodah Zarah, which is brought down also in Torah? Or is Tammuz representing the higher level of godliness? And the answer is, the Rebbe says, of course it means really the higher level of godliness. Just because there's shaitim and fools, the Torah brings out that there were people that served an idol called Tammuz. But what's it really? It's really reflective of the greatest level of godliness. And we see this also, a famous example we spoke many times, but I think it's a very good example. The Gemara says, think about that for a second. God says, the Torah says, gold was created, brought into this world only for the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Can I ask you a question? Throughout the history of mankind, from 5,782 years ago, how many people were murdered and killed because of gold? Hundreds of thousands? Millions? We know through history how much people were murdered because of money, because of greed, etc., etc. Millions upon millions, hundreds of millions of people. And we're going to say that there was a Beis HaMikdash, and therefore gold is brought, and the Egel Azov was made from gold. One of the greatest sins of all time. So here comes the famous thing, God created the world in such a way that He's given us the choice. You're going to wear the right glasses with the 20/20 vision, or you're going to make something and look at something twisted, warped, perverted, etc., crooked. So you have to know what's the real definition of Tammuz. The real definition of Tammuz and the real meaning of Tammuz is the idea that it's a Gilui Elikos. It's a divine revelation of the highest order. Other people use Tammuz for Avodah Zarah, so they're fools. Now the same thing is over here, similarly. Of course, there's a day which is called Shiva Tammuz. And of course, in this case, the idea of Tammuz, that it's connected to sadness and tragedy and destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, is true. Not like the name of Tammuz and Avodah Zarah. But it's just an example. I'm just saying, being an example, that there's a paradox, and then we go deeper. Same thing's over here. Of course, Tammuz has elements of Yemei Bein HaMitzorim, and there's certain laws of mourning, etc., that start once the 3 weeks start, etc., etc. But still we have to realize that the real amitis and pnimius of Shiva Asa B'Tammuz itself, Churban itself, is Geula. What proves this also? The famous Halacha Rambam, which says that Yehovcha Yom Meil Sasan Al Simcha L'Meidim Tovim. The Rambam says that the fast days are going to be transformed to Yom Tovim. The fast days are going to be transformed into holidays. So you can ask a klotz kasha, why should they be transformed into holidays? We shouldn't mention it. When the husband blows up his house and his children are murdered, that's what happened by the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So it's a sad day. Tisha B'Av is a sad day. Shavuos Tammuz is a sad day. Let's not make mention of it. We go like this. Let bygones be bygones. We messed up, or whatever the story is. It wasn't good days in the marriage. It wasn't good days. It wasn't the finer moments of our relationship. And say good riddance. Thank God. Now Mashiach's here. And we only stress and emphasize the good days. Happy days are here again. Baruch Hashem. No, that's not what we say. We say, what does that mean? We're going to strip away the veneer. We're going to go behind the veil and we're going to see that really Tisha B'Av itself is a Yontif. So is Shavuos Tammuz. And Tammuz in general. Etc., etc. As we spoke many times about how the word Goyla means Geula. The Rebbe, by the way, also talks about this with a famous analogy. This is one of my favorite analogies of all time. So it could be I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it now very, very shortly. And that's the analogy of the teacher's trance. We have a teacher, and he's teaching the students. And while he's teaching, a new idea comes to his head. A new idea where the teacher senses that it's unparalleled. He never had such a new idea. And he feels that it's tremendous, monumental, epic. But the rule is, if you want that new idea and to absorb it and to grasp it, internalize it properly, you have to ride the wave. You have to ride the tornado. So you have to latch onto it to try to internalize it. So here's the teacher, he's teaching. In the middle of his teaching the students, this idea falls into his head. And now he has a dilemma. What's the dilemma? Jump to try to internalize that thought, which then he has to abandon so-called the students? Or does he ignore that idea and teach the students? And the answer is, he jumps with the idea. And he has to externally, superficially, seemingly abandon the students. But why is it not abandoning the students? And this is the key point. Because the whole purpose of why he wants to internalize this new idea is to eventually give it over to the students. The entire purpose of the teacher is the students. He serves the students. He's not chasing after the new idea because he wants to feel higher, inspired, and reach greater heights of intellectual mastery. No! The reason he's going after the idea is because he's a teacher. He's thoroughly a teacher. His whole essence is a teacher. His whole purpose is to teach. But he has this elusive new idea that he knows is going to transform the students' lives like nothing else before. So now he has to abandon the students, seemingly, momentarily. The Rebbe says this is the idea of Churban Beis Hamikdash. There's a lot to talk about this idea. Well, maybe we'll leave it for another time, maybe later on in the 3 weeks. The way we have to look at the 3 weeks is the teacher who momentarily abandons the students. He's in a trance, but it's because something's cooking. Something's baking. Something like never else before. Something's percolating. Something new, something amazing. For you, for the student. And we have to trust the teacher. And we have to understand. We have to see beneath the surface to understand it's always, was, is, and will be about the teacher's love to the students. And the same thing is with the Eibishter, the same thing is with the 3 weeks, and the 9 days, and Golus, etc., etc., etc. So now, look what happens. In a Shabbos, which Shiva Asa B'Tammuz falls on a Shabbos, and this year Tisha B'Av will also fall on Shabbos, that's the greatest of the greatest transformation. These very same days, where B'chitzonis externally, it seems like the teacher abandons us. And now, and therefore usually generally there are certain laws associated with the Chitzonis, with the way it seems superficially, externally. Days of mourning, that aspect of Tammuz, comes along the Hebrew calendar when Shavuos B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av falls out on a Shabbos, where the whole thing is out the window, i.e., the real, true idea of Tisha B'Av is revealed. When we have a Tisha B'Av and a Shabbos, and we have a Shavuos B'Tammuz on a Shabbos, so it's Mamish Mashiach. Yohavchu Yom Melu L'Shabbos, the highest level. You're not allowed to have any hint of mourning whatsoever. And on the contrary, we have to show extra joy so nobody should think that there's any trace of any mourning whatsoever during the Shabbos of the 3 weeks, as is known. So now we understand the connection between Yud Beis Tammuz that was this week, the idea of miracles coming from inside, Balak and Bilam looking on the outside, the nasty, cruel characters, heartless. But really, in the end, from them comes the greatest blessings. And the same thing is true concerning Shabbos, Shivasa B'Tammuz. The connection to Pirkei Avos is obvious, and that's the Mishnah which says, Kol Masha Bara Kodesh Baruch Hu, Ba'ilomai, everything that Hashem created in the world, Leivroi Elo L'chvoidai, He didn't create only for His honor. So this is it. This is the idea of Achdus Hashem, Einin Lavadai. Everything is really positive. Everything is only Hashem. And this Mishnah, whether you like it or not, this is the truth. It's about everything. Kol Masha HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ba'ilomai. Your father, you have children, is to bring you closer to God, to appreciate God more. Your marriage, your wife, it's so you should appreciate God more. Your husband, it's so you should appreciate God more. That's a fact. That's what the Mishnah is telling you. Kol Masha Baruch Leilomai B'roi L'chvoidei. How do you see God in your marriage and in your relationships with everyone else and with your children and in your business? That's a separate story. Speak to your local mashpia. But in the end, you have to realize, Kol Masecha Yiyu L'Shem Shemayim Uv'chol D'rachecha Do'eyu. Kol Masha Baruch Hu B'roi L'chvoidei Bilam, Balak, Tisha B'Av, etc., etc. I want to finish off with something that I just found out last week. Amazing thing about miracles. Now's not time to elaborate. But there was a great miracle in our times, the Miracle of Entebbe. And somebody showed me an article in the Hasidic, their hair magazine, which I never saw before, but someone pointed out to me last Shabbos. And I'm going to show you over here the page that they have a copy of a letter that the Rebbe sent to somebody who's like working in intelligence at that time, in 1976, to the Israeli army. And I'm going to read you some of the lines that the Rebbe says here. And this is the lesson we have to think about. Look at how the Rebbe reacts to a miracle. You can start crying. You'd think the Rebbe is beyond commandos, beyond airplanes, beyond... He's the Kabbalistic mystic who's in the cave, who's just connecting to God and everything's working out. What does he have to know about the training and the minutes of the cabinet meetings and the details of the operation? And here we see Nesi Dereinu, Tzaddik Yisod Olam, the highest level tzaddik. He's obsessed with the details of what happened in the Miracle of Entebbe more than the people in the Israeli army themselves. And he writes that himself to the person who sent him the detailed report. Someone from Israel, obviously someone very high up in intelligence or in the cabinet or I don't know what, sent the Rebbe a detailed report about the build-up and plans and everything about Entebbe. And the Rebbe responded to him in a letter. And the Rebbe wrote this letter on a regular piece of paper, and he somehow sent this person back a response. And he says, I'm not sending it through the regular stationery and a regular envelope of my office so that it should be confidential completely. So but how did the Rebbe send it? Who knows? The Rebbe has his ways. Maybe there was some other very special person that came into Yechidus to a private audience with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe handed this piece of paper to him and said, give it to this person personally when you go back to Israel. But I just want to read to you some lines that he writes in this letter. Tach, tach. He says, thank you so much for the minutes of the meetings. And then he says, you should know, kumuvan, hischalti tekev likre aduch. I immediately started reading this. Umischaltiv korosev atumay, ubehem shechechad. As soon as I started reading your report, I finished it, and in one go. You can imagine the Rebbe is dealing with thousands of letters every single day, emergencies, things we cannot even comprehend, all on his desk. And he says, I put everything else aside on my table. I put everything else aside from my desk. And I read your report about the miracle of the story of Entebbe. And then he says, you can't imagine the impact that it had on me. Okay, and then he writes many things over here. But I just want to say one thing. Like, for example, he says, Amarti sheyatsiu v'yidreish hakomas pluga miyechedes chashois me'ein zu shebitzo hachilutz. The Rebbe said that he's suggesting you should have a counter-terrorism unit that should be able to be effective immediately. So when there's an emergency, it can respond instantaneously, immediately. Because in the story of Entebbe, it took a couple of days of practice and training. I don't know how long, 1 or 2 days. The miracle in the Hebrew date, by the way, is Vav Tammuz. Anyways, so the Rebbe over here in 1976, he's already suggesting to Israel that they should create a counter-terrorist unit that can respond to such crises immediately. How amazing is that? Israel didn't have it. And I imagine no country had such a unit. And the Rebbe is telling the Israeli army what to do. And then he says over here, I gave this all and I'm sending it back, not with the regular stationery, and I hope you forgive me, etc., etc. Anyways, look up this article. But to me, why am I mentioning this? Because we're talking about miracles. And to me, the message and the lesson is look at the Rebbe. Look at the Rebbe and what kind of tzaddik he is. And he teaches us how we should be connected to Hashem. And look at the Rebbe, how he was so inspired by the miracle of Entebbe. He spoke about it by Farbrengens, and the article mentions what the Rebbe spoke about the Beis Tammuz. But whatever the Rebbe spoke about Farbrengens, that's like officially what I knew about then. And he said it's a miracle. He said we have to celebrate the miracle. But I would have never imagined that the Rebbe was corresponding with Israeli intelligence, with high cabinet members from Israel. And how he writes that I put everything aside. Everything aside. This became the number one priority. When it reached me, the news and the details of the operation, more than everything else. So this is a lesson for us. Like we spoke last week. We have to look at miracles. We have to think about the miracles that the Eibush is doing for us. All the level of miracles. Miracles that we don't know about. Miracles that we find out about later. Miracles that will happen. So the Eibush should help that from this Chag HaGeula, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, and especially this Shabbos, which is the Shiva Asa B'Tammuz Nidche, the Eibush should help that we should not come to an Inyan of the fast day of Sunday, but it should be that we're going into Shabbos, Yom Sheku Shabbos Menucha, and we should go straight from Shabbos, Areinspringen in Gula Misa Shleima, take it from Yad, Mamish, posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.